Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to get your attention for a few minutes. We just want to talk about some of the artwork and the artists and tell you a little bit more about what they're doing. And so we have a three-person show here, which is called The Intricate Dance of Beauty and Form, which is actually a quote from something in Linda's statement, which is very interesting. She'll tell you more about that. We have John Arabolos and Linda Dempsey, and whose paintings, and John is Dina Naumann's sculptures, which you see all around, which are metal sculptures. And so John Arabolos has done some graphic pieces. John is teaches, is professor of interior design and pre-architecture program at University of New Haven. So art and design. He's a graduate of Pratt Institute, New York, and Hartford Art School. And it's interesting, he refers to codes and how his work works with the interiors. But what he's doing that I see is they're fractals that are like Mandelbrot sets that are mounted on aluminum. So if you can tell us some more about what you're doing with the
all right, thank you folks for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm going to kind of keep it a little brief because we can get pretty technical very quickly. Back in the 1990s, I became very, very much interested in something called chaos theory, which is the study of random forms in nature. If anybody, you see chaotic systems in front of you every single day. I'll give you an example. When you see a tree that is growing, a branch will come off of it. That's called a bifurcation. The tree continues to grow, another bifurcation happens, and they come out what seems initially as randomly, but when the whole thing is finally fully grown, it has a full sense of symmetry and balance to it. All the leaves are the same, but no two leaves are the same, actual size or shape or form or color, that type of thing. Pine needles from a pine tree, for example, when they fall off of a pine tree, they all fall at different times and they blanket the ground, and when you look at them, there are no two pine needles that are exactly the same size. There are no two that are exactly in the same position, yet they seem to have a very, very controlled and structured system to them. It's called a chaotic system. So I'm fascinated by how that happens in our natural environment, and I wanted to somehow get at and explore how we subconsciously relate to those kinds of images and make sense of them when we look at them. What is it that's going on inside of us intuitively and also subconsciously that enables us to put that picture together and understand what we're looking at? And so I used geometry as a tool to do that. I came up with an algorithm that I have since gotten a patent for, in which I can take the picture frame and break it down into multiples of geometric shapes with mirror images rematched, and then all borders that are mirror images to each themselves create very, very complex patterns. And that's how these all came to be up here, okay? So they can be almost at any size. Size is almost irrelevant. It can be any one of those patterns can be any given size, or I can take any element out of the middle of one of those patterns and make them very, very large also. And by doing that, and also in the way that we look at things, when we look at something, depending on the distance we are away from that, it looks like one thing, but as we get closer, it looks like something else. I don't know if you've ever seen that, okay? So initially, when I started doing this, I was working with symmetry that was more split image symmetry like this. I just brought this along for everybody to take a look at some early black and white stuff that I was doing. I was playing with this before I started working with color because I wanted to get a handle on and grip on the idea of what's going on with the patterns themselves. I mean, we're so conditioned to looking at things symmetrically, we don't even realize it. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I look in the mirror every day, I'm looking at my face and I'm hoping it's the same on both sides, right? Okay, but we design cars, we design houses, we design a cocktail table. If I look at it from one side, it's perfectly balanced on one side, it's perfectly symmetrical, okay? So that symmetry is ingrained in us subconsciously, and we don't even realize, and when we look at things, we put that on whatever we're looking at to try to make sense of it. And anything else that we've been experiencing over time in terms of visual information has an impact cumulatively on how we go and approach something. But there's some common basic intuitive responses in the way the psyche and the body, the brain interprets information. And that's what I like to play with, because I'm trying to get at just exactly what intuition's all about and how we really make sense of our sense of reality. So in any event, so these pieces up here were back in, these are probably in the early 2000s, most of them. These go back into the late 90s when I first started playing around with the idea of what chaos theory was all about. Since then, they've grown way beyond that. They've become much, much larger and larger scope in terms of size. What's also happened since then too is I'm actually able to go in and isolate different pieces and start putting them together and create very, very unusual asymmetrical patterns that have no symmetry whatsoever to them at all. So I can either create something that's like perfectly symmetrical in the sense of creating patterns for fabric. That's where the patent came in, by the way. So that you can do things in repeat or half repeats, drop repeats, and so on and so forth. And then because it's being done digitally, I can go in and alter the color to anything I want to. However, all of these are natural colors. They came right out of nature the way they are. Okay, so for example, the blue one on the wall, all the way to the right there, that was actually looking up through the canopy of trees in my backyard in the winter with snow on the trees and a blue sky in the background. That's what that comes from. And the one in the middle, the green one, is just basically grass. Okay, and that was in, I think it was North Haven at one of the public parks. There was an area where there was some swamp grass that was growing, and depending on whether it's the light green or dark green, depends on whether it was like just new grass growing or older grass, etc. And grass, when you look at a patch of grass, okay, you see everything, you know, it basically all offshoots like grass. You photograph it and you put the geometry onto it, and all of a sudden it creates dimension. So, and then the one all the way to the left, it comes from butterfly wings. That's the red one. And the one all the way on the right side in yellow, that's looking through a canopy of trees. The dark elements are actual branches from a tree. It was in Maine. And all the golden tones are the leaves in fall. Okay? And on this side over here, which not all of you can see, but the one in the middle, which is blue, came from butterfly wings. The one on the far right is from a butterfly wing also. And the one all the way to the left, there's this area in China where there are these mountains. They're called magic mountains. And because of the elements and chemicals that are in the soil naturally, when you look at the terrain, it has all those colors in it. That's right out of the picture, the way it was. And so when you take that and you have like a landscape of undulating hills, and you put the geometry onto it, you create structure with it, and all of a sudden you have something that has like a 4-point symmetry to it, and almost, etc. Okay? So scale-wise, again, I make it a subjective decision as to what size I want it to be, but I can make them any size that anybody wants when they commission me for them. So they're mounted on Dibond, which is an aluminum board. It's got a vinyl core, aluminum on 2 sides. These are high gloss Epson photographic paper that's laminated onto that with a 3M clear plastic high gloss protective film over the top of it. Okay, you can actually wash them with glass cleaner, even though they're photographs, photographic paper. And the ultraviolet protection on the paper is like 80 years. The film on top of it's another 75, 80 years. Color's never been a problem, or fading, and so on and so forth. Any got any questions? No?
Wow,
Anyway.
great technical explanation.
Yeah. Well, people look at, they really don't know where it comes from and what they're looking at. And sometimes I don't like to divulge what the subject matter is. I just want to let your imagination go. But when you find out what the subject matter is, it really kind of twists your head a little bit. I do a lot of exhibiting at the Open Studios. I do it every single year. And I met a woman from Yale who was a biologist. And she studied how the pigmentation in butterfly wings manifests itself over time through exposure to nature and natural environments and so on and so forth. And she said to me, gee, why don't you try working with butterfly wings, because the colors are spectacular. I'd never worked with anything other than grass and trees and things like that. So she gave me access at the Peabody Museum to their their archives, 60,000 files, and these high-resolution photographs of butterflies from all over the world. And I was able to go through and pick out different ones that I could use, and I can, as you know, my initial inspiration work to take the images from. So this is just a few pieces. I have thousands of these things created in a computer.
Well, the thing with fractals, though, is that the more microscopic levels you go down into, the more they keep breaking apart into more objectified visibility.
What Jonas is talking about is that even though it says that it's irregular and random pattern, the closer you get and the smaller it gets, the more it tends to start to do like what's called, it repeats itself in some sense. So you get a semblance of an image that happened before on a larger scale. And that's what a fractal pattern is.
Mandelbrot was here at Yale, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, Mandelbrot, the concept
interpreted the system
of chaos as a theory mathematically doesn't have color to it. It's just a mathematical concept that can be shown geometrically, right? And when he did what he did, he assigned colors to things. So that's why you see the colors in his pictures, okay? But what he discovered was the geometry of how things manifest themselves as they evolve. So
the colors are coded, in other words?
Right, so when you look at a picture, a Mandelbrot picture, you're going to see these like spirals. And on the spirals are smaller replications of the larger spiral and smaller ones going around. Then you go on those, you see smaller ones going around that. So it gets infinitely small and infinitely large. The same type of function happens over and over again, regardless of scale. And within chaos theory, there's something called complexity. In other words, even though it's chaotic patterns and the random patterns in nature, with 10% of it is something called predictability, and that's called complexity. That's what they use to predict the stock market with. That's what they use to predict the weather with. They use it in socio-political and psychological evaluation, and so on and so forth. So that it's like a law of averages, basically. Within a certain amount of information, 10% of it's going to be correct. And they're able to hone in on what that part of it is. So that's why we get the weather forecast out 7-8 days now. That never used to be the case. These are chaotic patterns that they're using, predicting weather patterns. Yeah, wow. Any questions?
I have a question. I mean, how do you get from a photograph? What's the process of getting down to that level?
Well, the funny thing about it is that I can walk around in nature and I can look at things and I can almost predict what it's going to look like now because I've been doing it for so long. Yeah. But it's all about scale. It's not so much the image as much as how close I want to get in or how far I want to get out that creates the patterns and their dynamic representation, I guess you could call it. So I'll give you an example. I have an image that is, I don't want to get too carried away with this. Let's say I have an image that's like 10 by 10. And within that 10 by 10, I take a 4-inch square. And within that 4-inch square, there could be thousands of pixels of color. You follow me so far? Okay? That's called the resolution within an image. Have you play around with Photoshop? You know what I'm talking about? Okay? All right. The more resolution, the sharper the image. The sharper the image, the larger you can blow it up. Okay? Now, within resolution like that, there's something called time-based correction. Where, so what they do is they can interpolate between the pixels so that as you expand and there's space, they can add pixels in that logically are the ones that should be there. So you can take something that's really small. NASA uses this when they're photographing us down here. We can see everything that they're doing, right? Okay. So yeah. So that pixelation that's there, all the colors. So that 4-inch square that I take within that larger 10-inch square, I could take that square and move it a millimeter and the whole picture changes. I could take it and turn it slightly and the whole picture changes. So theoretically, I could spend my life in one picture. Yeah. Moving it around ever so slightly and keep coming up with different things. But after a while, what would happen, because it's all the original source, I have them all spread out. You'd see a self-similarity on all of them, all the way across, and that's the idea of the pine needles on the ground. After, you follow me? No two are the same, but they're all from the same genre. It's cool stuff. So.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Excellent. That was really good. Nice presentation. Thank you.